Thank you very much, Chairperson, the press conference, and presidential spokesperson of the party, Mr. Damba. I want to recognize the Vice President of the Movement for Democratic Change, Honorable Paulina Mpariwa, the Deputy Secretary General, Honorable Benevolence Taisekwa, the Organizing Secretary for the MDC, Honorable Clifton Zumba, and Honorable Chuara, who is the chairperson of the Guardian Council, as well as the advisor to the President. We have our Secretary for Legal, Constitutional and Parliamentary Affairs, Advocate Wongoro, Ashley Wongoro, the young man who is seated on my far right. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, welcome to this press conference. I want to thank you on behalf of the MDC for making it at short notice. I want to assure you that we do not take this for granted at all. We meet at a time that there are various developments in our nation, and one of the developments in our nation is the hiking in the prices of or in the cost of transport as a result of the hiking in fuel prices. And this, the government has increased the fares, I think the price of fuel by 40%, and they have directly transferred the burden to the consumer. They've transferred this burden of the war in Iran on the ordinary Zimbabwean, the final consumer of the goods and services in our country. In other words, they've transferred this burden to the poor people. The people who use public transport now are paying, in some instances, $3 per trip, $2 per trip, $1.50 per trip. It is now rare to find a trip which is $1, and not possible to find a trip which is less than $1. What this government must have done is to subsidize the price of fuel so that the ordinary person is not affected. A simple calculation for people who commute every day to and from work is that they require something like 210 United States dollars for transport alone a month. And yet most of our people are earning much less than that. The government must live to its responsibility and subsidize so that the workers of Zimbabwe, those who are commuting to and from work every day, do not feel the burden. Recently, in an effort to hoodwink the people of Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF, through its information department, held a press conference at which they invited the co-chairperson of COPAC, Honorable Mwonzora Calls Paul Mangwana, to make certain statements. At that press conference and subsequent interviews, Honorable Mangwana made a number of important statements. The first important statement is that he acknowledged that any extension of term for the president requires a referendum. He was very emphatic about that if it came to extension of term of office for the office of president, then a referendum is required. However, he went on to say that because this amendment provides for an extension which is less than 3 years, an extension of 2 years, then it is not an extension of term. Honorable Mangwana went on to say that the Parliament of Zimbabwe was clothed with unmitigated powers to amend the constitution without necessarily going for referendum. He went on to say that because the amendment, in his view, the amendment did not involve any changes in the Bill of Rights or in the land rights, it did not require a referendum. While Honorable Mangwana was very correct that an extension of term requires a referendum, he was completely wrong about everything else. It is difficult to tell whether Honorable Mangwana was speaking his mind or was simply carrying a party instruction. Of course, the parliament does not have unfettered discretion to change the constitution. In terms of section 117 subsection 2, the parliament can only amend the constitution in terms of section 328. And the section 328 is the section we all know that it requires certain formalities to amend the constitution. So he is not right that the parliament has unlimited power to change the constitution. They can only change this constitution in terms of section 328. Then on the issue of whether 2 years does constitute an extension of term, Honorable Mangwana was relying on the wording of section 91 subsection 2. In terms of section 91 subsection 2 of the Constitution, for purposes of that section, 3 or more years is deemed a full term. In other words, where a person has been given an additional 3 years, they are deemed to have been given an equivalent of 5 years. In other words, they are deemed to have been given a full term. What is important about this section is that a person who has been given 3 years and more is deemed to have been given a full term. It means, therefore, that a person who has been given less than 3 years has been given an extension of term but not a full term. So in other words, an extension of the length of time from 5 years by an additional 2 years is an extension of term, but it does not constitute a full term. Now, for the avoidance of doubt here, what this section says is that 3 years will be construed as a full term, but anything below 3 years is an extension of term, but it is not a full term, but it is an extension nevertheless. So an extension of the Constitution by 3 years is an extension of term. An extension by 2 years is an extension of term. Now, this thing, they both require a referendum. The extension, whether by 2 years or by 3 years. Now, the matter is put beyond doubt by section 328, subsection 1. Section 328, subsection 1 says that the term limit provisions, term limit provisions are provisions that limit the length of time. So if it is 5 and then it is made 7, the length of time has been changed. In terms of section 328 subsection 7, it talks of an amendment, the effect of which is to extend the length of time that a person holds office. This means that if you are adding 2 more years to the president's term, you are extending his time in office by those 2 years. It still requires a referendum. To conclude on this point, the office of the president, the term of office of the president can be extended in 2 ways. The first way is by simply adding another term. So if he had 2 terms, it is simply adding a 3rd term. In this regard, 3 years is regarded as a full term. So the president, he would have served 3 terms. But it is also by extending the length of 1 term, which is the case with Amendment 3. The Amendment 3 extends the length of time by 2 years, but it is an extension nevertheless. If we were to take Honorable Mangwana's argument to its logical conclusion, what he means is that 2 years is equal to 0. 2 years is not 0 years. 2 years is 2 years. 2 years represents a movement. The extension represents a movement from 5 to 2. Therefore, it is an extension nevertheless, and it requires referendum. One final fatal argument that Honorable Mangwana in his presentation makes is that this Amendment 3 does not affect the Bill of Rights. And he says because it does not affect the Bill of Rights, it does not require a referendum. He also goes on to say that it does not affect land rights. He is correct in asserting that the amendment does not affect the land rights. But he is wrong to say that it does not affect the Bill of Rights. Section 3, subsection 2 of our Constitution provides the founding values, the values upon which Zimbabwe is predicated and found as a nation. One of the values that Section 3 talks about is the value of adult universal suffrage. What adult universal suffrage means is that a person who is over the age of 18 has the right to vote. Every Zimbabwean who is over the age of 18 has the right to vote in any election. It is only that right is only limited in Schedule 4 of the Constitution. And Schedule 4 says that you may not exercise the right to vote if you are mentally challenged or if you were convicted of an offense, an electoral offense, and you are declared to be ineligible as a voter, or of course if you are insolvent. So any Zimbabwean who is not mad, who is not insolvent, and who is not an election criminal has the right to vote, protected by Section 3. So if we again go to Section 3 itself, you will find that it talks about the authority to govern coming from the people. So the president's authority to govern must come from the people. It doesn't say from parliament, it says from the people. It goes on to say further that when people get vested rights, those rights are protected. So if, like Rachwara, I have voted over and over again for the president, I now have vested rights in that election. And those vested rights should not be taken. Now, how does this affect the Bill of Rights? By operation of Section 46 of the Constitution. Section 46 of the Constitution talks about when interpreting the Constitution. And it says, when interpreting the Constitution, you must do so in a manner that promotes values and principles that underline a democratic society based on openness, justice, human dignity, equality, and freedom. And in particular, the values and principles set in Section 3. That is adult universal suffrage. The right of any Zimbabwean who is not mad, who is not insolvent, who is not a convicted election offender to vote in any election. As long as you are 18 years, you are allowed to vote. And this is what is called, is meant by adult universal suffrage. This was an ideal of the armed struggle. The people went to war. Among other things, they wanted the right to vote. In fact, they said, they used the similar words, we want adult universal suffrage. One man, one vote. Of course, they should have said one person, one vote at that point in time. But they talked about universal adult suffrage. Now, Section 67 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe is in the Bill of Rights. And Section 67, subsection 3, says that every Zimbabwean above the age of 18 has the right to vote. In other words, the rights that are given in Section 67 are the rights to universal adult suffrage. And universal adult suffrage in our Constitution is only limited where one is mental challenges, convicted electoral offender, or is insolvent. So Section 67 provides for political rights. Every Zimbabwean above the age of 18 has the right to vote. Now, what this bill now does is that it then says every Zimbabwean who is above the age of 18 cannot vote in the presidential election unless they are a member of parliament. That means, therefore, the Bill of Rights is being amended. The political rights that were given to the people of Zimbabwe are being amended. And amended by taking away the right of the Zimbabwean person to vote for president. It is amended by taking away the vested rights that people who have voted before have now acquired by virtue of their voting. Therefore, this amendment affects the Bill of Rights. And because it affects the Bill of Rights, it must go for referendum. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very, very clear that the political rights which are contained in the Bill of Rights are being affected. And therefore, there is need for a referendum. There is a need not only for one referendum, but for two referendums. The first referendum is to determine whether the Zimbabweans want the extension of term or not. That is whether the president's term from 5 years must be changed to 7 years. That is the first referendum. The second referendum is coming by virtue of Section 328, and it is whether President Mnangagwa must benefit from the extension of term. With the greatest of respect, the press conference at which Honorable Mangwana was asked to speak, and it is very easy to see from the body language that he does not believe in what he's talking about. It is very, very clear for all of us who know him. It is very, very clear that what he is talking there does not make sense. He is a man who was involved in the crafting of this constitution and who knows the intention of the legislature. And the intention of the legislature was to protect the values of the liberation struggle. If you go to the preamble of this constitution, you see us talking about the respect of the values of the liberation struggle. If you go to chapter 2 of this constitution, you see us talking about the respect of the values of the liberation struggle. One of the values of the liberation struggle was universal adult suffrage, the right of a Zimbabwean person to vote in an election, and more importantly, to vote for the president. And we have already demonstrated that extension by 2 years is an extension, but it is an extension which does not constitute a full term. Something which is not a full term is probably a quarter term or a half term or a three-quarter term, but it is not nothing. It is something. It is an extension, and that extension is covered by our laws. You deal with it in terms of section 328. And the more we look at this, the more we see how the Zimbabweans tried to safeguard their rights, including the right to vote. Ladies and gentlemen, the Parliament of Zimbabwe has published a schedule of meetings at which they want to hear the views of the people of Zimbabwe. They have also asked the Zimbabweans to put their submissions in writing. I want to inform you that the Movement for Democratic Change is making its written submissions in accordance with what the Parliament has asked it to do. We urge all of the people of Zimbabwe to turn up in their numbers at these public hearings. But you will also notice that these so-called public hearings are mere tokenism. For example, in Mashona and the West, I think there is no hearing in Muromedzi, Chinoi, which other area? Karoi, and so on. We don't have public hearings at all. And I think in Harare we have two. In a city of more than 4 million people, you have 2 centers. So this is mere tokenism to hoodwink the people that they've been consulting. This is a fiat accompli, and so on. We have also noticed that there is growing violence and inequality that is being propagated in this country. ZANU-PF, day in, day out, are having their meetings where they are promoting this bill. In effect, they have doubled their efforts to promote this bill. They are being allowed to do that in full freedom. But other political parties are not being allowed to hold meetings. For example, in October last year, the MDC meeting in Bulawayo was attacked by thugs who called themselves Timiam Dara. And they were against anybody who was against the 2030 agenda. We have seen the disruption of Professor Maduk's meeting at his headquarters at 348 Chitepo Avenue, where he was brutalized and beaten in the presence of the police. And up to now, of course, Zimbabweans will be pleasantly surprised that nobody has been arrested. So we have the issue of deja vu. What happened in 2008 is happening again now. The victims are not being protected. The vigilantes, they are going around this country harassing people. Only last week, MDC National Women's Assembly was commemorating the International Women's Day in Bulawayo. The teams came in the presence of the police and started attacking the women with stones, pelting them with stones and other crude objects in the full glare of law enforcement. And the police did nothing. Deja vu. This is what happened in 2008. MDC was brutalized. And in fact, when MDC people went to complain to the police, it was the complainants who were arrested. This is what is coming to this country. And it is quite interesting that as we are going towards these public hearings, as we are going to the head on this amendment, the police are being taken for retraining. We don't know what they are being retrained for. The courts have been brought to a standstill because police witnesses cannot come because they are having special trainings and so on and so forth. We hope that this is not training for them to do what they did or for them not to do what they did not do in 2008. We want the people of Zimbabwe to speak in full freedom. Those who want the bill must be free to say they want it. Those who don't want it must be free to say that they don't want it. There is no need to brutalize the people of Zimbabwe. And the president of this country and his law enforcement ministers, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Minister of State Security, and even the Minister of Defense must come out in defense of the freedoms of the people of Zimbabwe. This violence, if it is allowed to continue, may spiral out of control. It brings national resentment. And I want to appeal to the Zimbabweans that the poor people are being used to fight other poor people. They are given cheap liquor, drugs, and asked to go and harass their fellow Zimbabweans. I want to urge all the youths in Zimbabwe not to be used by people who are rich already. Let the rich people send their sons and their daughters to do that dirty work because they are eating for it anyway. But there is nothing in this bill for the poor person. This bill does not bring employment. This bill does not bring free education. It does not bring free health care. It does not bring free maternity care. All it brings is more power to the already powerful. So there is nothing for the poor man and the poor woman in this bill. Ladies and gentlemen, we as the MDC call upon all Zimbabweans to go in their numbers to speak against the desecration of this constitution. We need to unite and stop this coup against our constitution. I want to say this in conclusion, and this is a direct plea to the President of the Republic. He has made his position on the bill clear in the interview with Christian Amanpour of the CNN, in an interview in Beijing, and in pronouncements in this country. And the last pronouncement was when he talked to the journalists. I don't know where it was, but I'm sure it was in Harare. And he said he is going to try to dissuade the persuaders. This is the time, Mr. President, to dissuade the persuaders. There is a group of powerful, corrupt individuals who want to desecrate our constitution because they materially benefit from the opaqueness of the political and economic system of this country. We should not allow them to prevail. And therefore, the president must take responsibility in terms of Section 90 of the Constitution and defend and protect this Constitution. Now, we were wondering why the president was quiet when the teams in ZANU-PF were falling over one another in fighting for the 2030. I think the answer is there now in the public domain, and the answer came from the interview by Honorable Mangwana. And in that interview, I know Honorable Mangwana was not speaking for himself. You wouldn't have said that. He was speaking on behalf of the powers that be, the invisible evil forces that are in this country. And they say that if the president does not agree with amendment number 3, he will face unspecified action. So we have a president who is acting under threat, and we must discourage that. We must not accept that. The people of Zimbabwe must defend their constitution. We want to avoid a situation where the president will act as a result of fear, where the president will act against his conscience. He told us, the president, that he is against this amendment. And he is a man who was in the liberation struggle. And he knows what the values of the liberation struggles were. What is it that is so powerful that will move him away from that? The people of Zimbabwe must protect this constitution. And protect it we shall. We know that there's going to be a lot of difficulty. We know that there is going to be a lot of bodily harm. that is going to be brought by these powerful forces. But these powerful forces elsewhere in the world have been defeated before. No amount of money, no amount of intimidation, no amount of violence can defeat an idea whose hour is come. The hour to defend the sovereignty of Zimbabwe, to defend the values of the liberation struggle has come, and we shall prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to invite questions from the journalists. Does anybody have a question? Yes, my brother. Name and media house.
Thank you, Mwonzora. Freelance.
Okay.
My question is, I want to know your position with the letter that was written by the generals to Parliament.
Second question. Yes, my brother.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Madu. Honorable Mwonzora, you were not a legislator. And do you have faith in what people will say during public hearings will matter in the final decision? What people will say will be considered, since you are an MP before?
Third question. Third question. Okay, ma'am. Okay. True.
Thank you very much. One thing I noticed about the generals who wrote this letter is a common denominator. And the common denominator is that almost all of them were fighters in the war of liberation. And almost all of them received the political education of that time. And the political education included why the liberation war was being fought. One of the reasons was to get our land back. The other reason was universal adult suffrage, one person, one vote. These are people who witnessed their comrades die in Nyadzonya, in Chimoyo, in Dugwe camp, in Freedom camp. These are people who experienced serious hardships. I was privileged enough at that point in time to have been old enough to understand what was going on. And I did see these things for myself. People going for days without eating, without water, without good sleep, and so on. Fighting for an ideal. And one of the ideals is the idea of universal suffrage. I am sure those people were not fighting for one parliamentarian, one vote. They were fighting for the people of Zimbabwe to have real power to choose their leaders. And therefore, they are speaking like patriots. And they were very disciplined. They have followed the channel that they were asked to follow. And they've written to the speaker. We need to pay attention to them. This government needs to pay attention to what these people are saying, because they are more than stakeholders. They are stockholders, because they participated in a grueling war of liberation. What amendment number 3 is doing is that it is constituting a serious betrayal of the liberation struggle. Why was it fought? In order for a few parliamentarians to determine the highest office of this land. In order for 350 people, privileged, corruptible, to decide who the President of the Republic is. And by the way, if you look at the amendment, it's very, I'm sure there will not be acting president anymore when a president goes or something like that. Because within 30 days, that parliament sits again. It can sit a day after the president is gone and elect another one. They don't have to consult the people. They have just to sit in Mount Hampden, the 350 of them, whining and dining and changing the fate of the people of Zimbabwe. And therefore, we agree with the sentiments expressed by the retired generals. That is a responsible statement. It accords with what we have been saying as the MDC, but we were speaking, of course, to people who cared not to listen. will what the people say matter? What determines whether what people say will be taken seriously or not is how serious the people will be themselves. Remember that they are going to there's going to be outreach. We will watch keenly about that outreach. People must speak in full freedom, and people must guard what they would have spoken. They must defend their ideas. And if the parliament were to disregard their ideas, then the people of Zimbabwe must speak to that parliament. They must exercise their sovereign power. And the power that they can exercise is right there in the constitution. The people of Zimbabwe, in terms of section 59 of our constitution, are allowed to demonstrate. They are allowed to peaceably assemble. And right now as we speak, Zimbabweans who are next to MPs in their constituencies must tell their MPs what they expect from them. And this is a legitimate thing. If we people in Nyanga North do not want this stupid amendment, we must be able to tell Maisanyatwe that. If people who are in other parts of the country don't want anything, they must tell their MP, so that when he goes, wherever he will go, he will know what the people are expecting from him. But as we have said before, as the MDC, there is something very wrong happening in the country. The MPs who are directly going to benefit are sitting in judgment of the amendment. And the president who is directly going to benefit is sitting deciding whether to assent or not to assent. There is a serious conflict of interest. And in fact, it is an obscene conflict of interest. And how we thought of dealing with that when we were doing the constitution is that we then said, when it comes to that eventuality, the people of Zimbabwe must decide. So what we are asking for, to be clear, we are not asking anybody to leave office before their term of office. We are simply saying that when the term of office is over, the president must simply go home and somebody else must be elected by the people. That's what we are saying. And we are saying that our constitution is good as it is. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. The problem for Zimbabweans is not that the term of office of the president is too short. That's not the problem of the Zimbabwean. The problem of the Zimbabwean people is that there is no employment. Transport costs are high. They are being fleeced by the rich and the powerful. And they want their freedom. That's what Zimbabweans want. Zimbabweans don't want any extension of term.
Yes, media house.
Yeah, my question is to the president. But if this constitution is amended, is endorsed without the will of the people of Zimbabwe, what are you going to do to defend the voice of the Western Zimbabweans, considering that they are scared of even going to the streets to protest, and considering what happened in the east of this particular area?
Okay. Question?
Yeah. So, before I come to the very important question that the last speaker raised, let me just go back to the MPs. When these MPs were elected in 2023, they were given a 5-year mandate by the electorate. Now, when that mandate expires at midnight in September 2028. The MPs will cease to have that mandate. And the bill does not cover them. I know what they want to say is that it is covered by implication. Yes? But they have to seek the mandate of the people. Who told them that we wanted them to go beyond the 5 years that we gave them? We gave them the 5 years. And if they want anything more than that, they must come to us. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are saying is that ZANU-PF is free to make any suggestion that it wants, but it cannot sit in judgment of the same suggestion. You make a suggestion, you deliberate over it yourself, and then you implement it yourself. Inishona hanzi wonyika zviyo zvako, wobika doro rako, wonwa doro rako, woridza ngoma yako, wotamba ngoma yako, wobudirwa neshairi rako. This is what is happening with these MPs. And I'm sorry to say, and ZANU-PF, and whatever it stands for. The interesting question that came from my friend there, if I was allowed, I was going to say to him, what do you think we should do in that eventuality? How should we defend our sovereignty? How should we defend our independence? Because we are being recolonized here. Some people are now trying to import a Chinese system in our country. And we are being recolonized without, well, some of us are seeing that, but without our will. Now, we are saying that this constitution must not be endorsed. This amendment must not be endorsed. That the people of Zimbabwe must fight tooth, claw, and nail to prevent the desecration. And at this point in time, we follow the Chinese saga, isn't it? Fight 100 battles and win 100 victories. We are not budgeting for defeat. We are not budgeting for lack of success. We want, if we are united as a people across the political divide, nothing and nobody can defeat us and impose this. But if we are divided by petty differences, especially within the opposition, if we lose sight of the bigger picture and start squabbling against one another, as we see in the social media, we weaken ourselves. But Zimbabweans are capable of defeating this vile amendment. But what shall we do? What we shall do depends on the circumstances that exist at the time that this thing arises. We as the MDC are not gifted in speculation about what the objective conditions will be at the time that you say what is going to happen will happen. What the objective conditions will be like will determine how the interventions that we will make. But certainly we shall not sit by and let the independence of this country be usurped and be put in the hands of a few corrupt individuals who are enjoying the wealth of this country on behalf of the masses. But definitely I know that Zimbabweans will do something about it. What is saddening also is that the international community is looking at us, and the international community is wondering why Zimbabwe, which has so many economic challenges, is prescribing a wrong solution. The answer to joblessness, the answer to the students who cannot get educational support, the answer to the poor peasants who cannot afford inputs, the answer to young men and women who cannot make ends meet does not lie in amendment of the Constitution. It lies with the economic and the political reforms in our country, there is absolutely no justification of this amendment, and the people of Zimbabwe must resist the amendment.
Any question? So I think without any other further questions, I think we've come to the close of our press conference.